are listening to Based in Fact, a true crime podcast. Join host Lisa O'Brien and Kyle Evans as they examine America's most infamous true crime cases as they were established in our courts and the basis for the decisions of the appeals courts, not the court of public opinion. Here's Lisa and Kyle.
Welcome to season 3 of Based in Fact, a true crime podcast. We're your hosts, Lisa O'Brien and Kyle Evans, and this is episode 10, State of California versus Phillip Spector. On February 3rd, 2003, actress and model Lana Clarkson was murdered by music producer Phil Spector, who had a history of violence against women that included threatening them with firearms. Lana met Spector while working as a hostess at the House of Blues in Hollywood. Spector later claimed that Lana killed herself. When that didn't work, he claimed she shot herself accidentally. We'll talk about the scandal that was the beginning of the end for Dr. Henry C. Lee, Spector's first trial, which ended in a mistrial in 2007, his second trial and conviction in April 2009, and his sentencing in May 2009. Spector, who would have become eligible for parole this year, died of COVID-19 in January 2021. A little bit of a spoiler alert for folks. And before we get started, Kyle, I want to mark we've had some significant celebrities passing away this weekend. Dr. Ruth Westheimer, Richard Simmons, and Shannon Doherty all passed away on, I believe, Saturday.
Hey, you cut out for just a
Hey,
quick
I
sec,
know.
Lisa.
I'm gonna have to look into StreamYard because this is getting on my nerves. Because it should not do this. I never have a problem. I stream my TV and I never have a problem. This is the only place on Zoom when I have a problem. So sorry, folks. What cut off? Where did it cut off?
Pretty early on, right when you started, I think. I heard Saturday and then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, Richard Simmons, and Shannon Doherty all passed away on Saturday. Today is also a Bastille Day.
I'm sort of kind of getting tired of that Chinese proverb that said, "May you live in interesting times." I'm kind of ready to live in boring and uninteresting times.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there was also an attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, which I should have probably led with that, but he was injured, not seriously. A person at the rally was killed, as was the gunman. So, but that will be a developing story over the next probably several months. So, how was your break? How was your 4th of July?
It was good. We enjoyed it, didn't do too much, but went to the lake with some friends and tried to celebrate America in the best way we could, but it was nice. Nothing crazy, but all a good time. How about yours?
It was quiet. I had a 4-day weekend. Worked on my research a little bit and just kind of lazed around the house on Thursday and Friday. So, which I love to do.
Things to do, exactly, right?
So, and I also want to give a shout out to Brianna. I met her on Wednesday during a medical appointment, and I just wanted to give her a shout out if this is the True Crime Podcast that she listens to. And I have the information that we talked about. And if you want to hear more, just hit me up at my email, which I left with the office. So, hi, Brianna. Brian, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So that was very interesting when I talked about a true crime podcast, and she believes that she listens to this one. So shout out. Okay, we're done. All right, let's get to our case of the day for this episode. Of course, we start with the victim, Lana Jean Clarkson. She was born April 5th, 1962, in Long Beach, Los Angeles County, California. Her parents were James M. Clarkson, who died in 1978, and her mother was Donna Clarkson. She had a half brother and half sister, Jesse J. Clarkson, born in 1973. He works in the entertainment industry. He is in the production side. I have production designer, but I didn't verify that that's correct. And then a sister, Fawn Clarkson. Lana went to Cloverdale High School, I believe in Sonoma County, because her family moved to Northern California. And then she went to Pacific Union College Preparatory School, also in Northern California, I believe. Shortly after she graduated in 1980, her family returned to Southern California in Los Angeles County, where Lana went into the entertainment industry. She became an actress and a model. She was a very tall, leggy blonde. She was 6 feet tall. She was beautiful. Anybody who's seen a picture of her, which I'm sure there were a lot of pictures of her in 2003 when she passed away, was murdered. She was a very beautiful woman. And she also, what happens to women in Hollywood is you get to age 30 and the roles become fewer and further between. But Lana was reinventing herself. She wanted to do stand-up comedy, so she had started performing at open mic nights. And then she also, to help make ends meet, she took a job as a hostess at the Hard Rock in Hollywood. But her modeling career was not over. And
Was
we'll
she at
talk
the Hard
about that
Rock
a
or the
little
House
bit.
of Blues?
Oh, House of Blues. I don't know why I put Hard Rock.
They seem like the same place.
They are pretty much. I mean, well, I don't know. I think House of Blues, I'm always more partial to House of Blues because Dan Aykroyd is one of the owners.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah. And I think like Hard Rock is kind of meh. And I don't think like the Hard Rock in New Orleans, I don't think they're still open.
Yeah, I don't know if many of them are open anymore. There's some House of Blues around. There's still one in Dallas. I know there's one in New Orleans, but I
my
don't know if there's that
apologies.
many.
I don't know how I got Hard Rock caught in my head. And that is why. And I hope to God I didn't put that in the rest of my notes. So Lana appeared in several movies. Her first movie was Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which anybody in my generation will remember. It dealt with high school coming of age story. She played the wife of Vincent Schiavello's character, who was the science teacher. So we have this tall ogre looking man with curly dark hair, married to this statuesque, beautiful blonde woman.
So, Lisa, this is totally chasing a rabbit, but I think I told you for reasons I can't explain, I've been rewatching old episodes of Cold Case. And I was watching one last night or the night before, and Mike Damone is in it. He's like, 60 and plays a newsstand operator, but he still talks the same way. He's like, yeah, I don't know. It was like Damone, like you sound exactly the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. I can't remember that actor's name. I think it's Richard Romano or Robert
That
Romano.
Sounds right.
But yeah, I've seen him, and then like I remember right before Fast Times came out, and I think while they were filming is when Jennifer Jason Leigh's father, Vic Morrow, was killed in the Twilight Zone helicopter crash.
I forgot that was her dad. I
And I
remember
believe
that,
that
but I
happened while
forgot
they
that
were
was her
filming.
dad.
And so that was a story that came out. Her connection came out at the time the movie was released.
Well, there's a lot of famous people in that movie. I mean, obviously Sean
Phoebe
Penn, but
Cates,
also, and Forrest Whitaker,
Judge
who's
Reinhold,
from my hometown.
Judge Reinhold.
Yeah.
There were a few others whose
Yeah,
names
there's quite a
escape me at the
few.
moment. Anthony Edwards,
Yep.
Eric Stoltz.
Yeah.
They were, Sean Penn's,
But yep.
Spicoli's buddies. I think Nicolas Cage
Yeah,
was
I think you're
also in
right.
it.
I think
So
you're
yeah,
right.
yeah. So a lot of people got their start in 1981, 1982 in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Lana also appeared in Deathstalker, Barbarian Queen and Barbarian Queen 2, and Amazon Women on the Moon. And those are 3 movies that are cult classics that really kind of also helped Lana remain current to a degree. Because in the early 2000s, we began to have Comic-Cons. And she was a very popular person to attend Comic-Con. Lana also appeared on numerous television series of the 80s, which I'm familiar with and I used to watch, but you probably have to rack your brain trying to figure out. There was Night Court, Riptide, Three's Company, Knight Rider, Wings, A-Team, Who's the Boss, and Silk Stockings. And those are just to name a few. I did not list all of her TV and all of her movie accomplishments. Lana died from a gunshot wound to the head. So then we move on to the perpetrator, Harvey Phillip Spector. He adopted the spelling of Phillip later in life. He went by the name Philip. I don't know whether he officially dropped Harvey or whether he just didn't use it. He was born December 26, 1939 in Bronx County, New York. His parents were Baruch, anglicized name Benjamin Spectus or Spectrus, who was born in Russia in 1903, and Bertha Spector, Spektor, who was also born in Russia in 1911. Now, there's a claim that they were cousins, but I don't believe that that is accurate. From my research, they were born in different places in Russia, and their original names were not the same. They were different. When they emigrated to the United States, however, both families adopted the name Spector, Spector, and when they came into the United States, they were processed by a gentleman named Isidore Spector, Spector. So that more likely than not is where the name Spector came from. Benjamin committed suicide in 1949 when Phil was 10, and Bertha lived until 1995. After Benjamin's death, Bertha moved to Los Angeles. And apparently Bertha used to bully Phil. And other kids used to bully Phil. Of course, you can probably pretty much see why. Because he was a slight, small, odd-looking, probably odd person.
Yeah.
Or odd child. And in the 1940s and 50s, those people just didn't do well. He had a sister named Shirley, who was born in 1933. She was 6 years older than he was, and she died in 2004. He attended John Burroughs Junior High School in Los Angeles and then Fairfax High School. He was a songwriter, a musician, a record producer, creator of the Wall of Sound. He owned record labels, and he was a manager. And as a producer, he possessed a lot of master tapes and rights to a significant song catalog, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. Now, could you please, Kyle, explain to listeners what the wall of sound really is?
I feel like that's a lot of pressure, but I mean, basically the way I can think about it as a simple way is basically what he did was he took one, I would say he added lots of instruments to a track. So he would add pianos, electric pianos, harpsichords, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, horns. And basically, what they would do, he would record, an acoustic part, and then he would record an electric guitar part, and then he would record, multiple guitar and all basically put it all together so it sounded like a single instrument, even though it might have been 5 or 6 different tracks all
Okay.
together. And so
Okay.
basically, you just had a much richer, fuller sound because it was really 5 or 6 instruments, 5 or 6 tracks all combined into one. So you might think, oh, this is one piano playing, but in reality, it was 4 piano tracks, a harpsichord track, and an electric piano track, but all blended together that really provided a richness and a robustness to the sound that had not been done before.
Okay. That's a great, and that's an explanation I could not really come up with. Because I read it too. Now, I also read, and did you find this in your research of it? Wall of sound does not sound good on stereo, or as good for with stereo as it did on mono, single speaker, jukebox speaker.
Yeah, it was designed to be Yeah, I remember saying that. It was really designed to make the jukebox give that a much richer sound.
Okay. Yeah. So that was what I found too. So it's probably, I mean, although some artists like Bruce Springsteen and other artists have used similar techniques, it's probably not as useful now because everything's stereo.
Right. I think that's probably right.
So, all right. So Spector's body of work, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of a representative list for me. He did write a song, "To Know Him Is to Love Him," which is the epitaph on his father's grave, or based off the epitaph on his father's grave. When he was with a band called the Teddy Bears, which was in 1959. He was also co-author of the song "Spanish Harlem," and he played as a musician on the song on Broadway. He produced a lot of singles: "Twist and Shout," "Pretty Little Angel Eyes," "Be My Boy," "Secondhand Love" with Connie Francis, "There's No Other Baby Like My Baby" with the Crystals, "Uptown," "River Deep," "Mountain High" with Ike and Tina Turner, "Let It Be" with the Beatles. And I think he was involved in production of the movie as well.
Yep.
"Instant Karma" with John Lennon, "Death of a Ladies' Man" with Leonard Cohen, "Concert for Bangladesh" with George Harrison, "Be My Baby" with the Ronettes. "To Do Run Run," I think is another song
Yep.
from but most of his work was actually in the 50s and 60s, and
Yep.
then toward the 70s he didn't have quite as much work because his drinking and drug use began to impact his ability to work, and I think it impacted his creativity, and it definitely impacted his personality, which we will get to. He produced a record for Derek and the Dominoes, which was so horrible it was withdrawn. And then End of the Century with the Ramones in the 1980s. He worked with another band, an English band, in 2003. But that was his last creative job.
Well, I know you're going to get to them later, but I know they said, I guess Sounds like Ike and Tina Turner's River Deep Mountain High is what they say is the pinnacle of the wall of sound. That is the both Phil Spector and George Harrison
Yes.
said that was the greatest example of the wall of sound. So if somebody wants to listen to that,
Yeah.
is a good way
And
to understand what we mean by the wall of sound.
he also claimed some part in Righteous Brothers, You've Lost That Loving Feeling,
Yeah, I think that was
but
also
I
produced by
think
him
Bill
as well.
Medley disputed that. So I didn't include that. If I recall reading, he was going to work on it and they weren't happy with what he did. And so they went back to the drawing board and redid it. But he also claimed ownership of that one too. And as a producer, he got a lot of, like I said, he had a massive song catalog. That's what, even when he stopped working, he always had royalties from the songs. If anybody wanted to use a Phil Spector song, they paid Phil Spector.
Right.
Phil got paid. He owned record labels. He also served as A&R for record labels, Phillies Records, Liberty Records, Apple Records, Warner Spector Records, EMI, and Polydor, which were mainly English European labels. He worked with the Ronettes, including his first or second wife, Veronica Bennett, Ronnie Spector, Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans, Darlene Love, Righteous Brothers, Beatles, John Lennon, George Harrison. Sonny Bono was an assistant of his at one time, and that is when Sonny and Cher got started. So he worked with Cher, Leonard Cohen, the Ramones, and Star Sailor, who were a Brit pop band in 2003 that nobody's ever heard of. He also had a group of studio musicians called the Wrecking Crew that were the ones behind the tracks and the multiple tracks and things like that with the Wall of Sound. And they included names like Hal Blaine, Carol Kay, Tommy Tedesco, Billy Strange, Glenn Campbell, Leon Russell, and Dr. John. And
Wow, that is
again,
a hardcore lineup.
that's a representative. Glenn Campbell was in the early 60s. And then I think once he became famous on his own, he didn't need to be a studio musician anymore.
Right.
So, I think Leon Russell and Dr. John just loved music so much that if they could be part of making it, they would be part of making it, whether it was as the primary artist or as part of a crew. He was married to Annette Marar from 1963 to 1966, Veronica Ronnie Bennett from 1968 to 1974, and then a woman named Rochelle Short from 2006 to 2018. He adopted 3 children in 1969 and 1971 during his marriage to Ronnie Bennett. First, he adopted Dante Phillip Spector, who was born in March of 1969. He adopted him in November. He adopted Louis Phillip Spector and Gary Phillip Spector, who were twins, born in 1966, when they were 5 years old in 1971. And then in 1982, he had twins with a girlfriend, Nicole Audrey Spector, who was born October 17, 1982, and her twin brother, Philip Jr., who died on Christmas Day, 1991 from leukemia. And some people trace a lot of the erratic behavior to Philip Jr.'s death, but based on the allegations of Ronnie Spector and based on incidents that happened with John Lennon during the 70s and other artists during the 70s, Philip Spector's death was not the cause of Phil Sr.'s downfall. He is controlling, abusive, misogynistic, and bipolar. and his prior crimes included kidnapping, rape, and sexual assault, domestic violence, and assault. And, the irony is that had he not murdered Lana, probably in the late 2010s, he would have gotten caught up in Me Too.
Yeah.
Based on things that he did to his girlfriends and women who dated him. And again, his victim was Lana Clarkson, who was just 40 years old. So we're going to get to the crime. It occurred on February 3rd, 2003. The victim was Lana Clarkson, age 40. The crime occurred at 1700 Grandview Drive in Alhambra, California, and that is a residence that was known as the Pyrenees Castle, which was built in 1925. It's a very interesting place, interesting history. It was in Los Angeles County, or is in Los Angeles County. During the 1970s, Spector's career as a record producer stalled due to his alcohol use and erratic behavior that went beyond mild eccentricity. The quality of his work deteriorated, and fewer artists were inclined to work with him. Spector is rumored to have fired off a gun in a Los Angeles recording studio while working with John Lennon. Later, it was alleged that he threatened the Ramones with a gun while working with them. He also apparently threatened Leonard Cohen and Debbie Harry, which were stories I didn't see when I was doing my initial research. Twice married and divorced, Spector exhibited a disturbing pattern of abusive and controlling behavior with his second wife, Ronnie Spector, and children, Louis, Gary, and Dante. Spector held Ronnie and the children as prisoners in their home, refusing to let Ronnie travel and perform with her group, the Ronettes. She finally escaped with the help of her mother, but had to leave her adopted sons behind. Gary and Dante have alleged that they were sexually abused while in their father's care. In 1974, Spector was severely injured in a car crash in Hollywood. He was thrown through the windshield of his vehicle, sustaining serious head injuries and cuts that required dozens of stitches in his head. Spector's pattern of behavior continued with women through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Heavy drinking and drug use would result in drunken rages, during which Spector would hold his girlfriends or dates hostage, threatening them with guns, a revolver, or a shotgun, and death. During the 1980s, Lana Clarkson saw some success as an actress and model. After she turned 30, she suffered a fate familiar to many models and actresses. Jobs become fewer and farther between. That didn't stop Lana, who performed stand-up comedy at open mic nights and produced a one-woman film called Lana Unleashed. She hosted a website to interact with her fans on message board and to market autographed DVDs. Her role in cult classics also made her a popular guest at Comic-Cons. In 2001, Lana fell while dancing at a Christmas party, severely injuring both wrists. Her recovery was slow, painful, and long. By early 2003, she was physically recovered and getting her career back on track. She'd booked a spokesmodel job with Siemens, a cell phone producer, and was scheduled for costume wardrobe fittings in early February. She'd also booked a job for modeling work in Spain, also scheduled to begin in early February. To make ends meet, Lana took a job at the House of Blues in late January. She would work as a hostess and as security for the Fountain Room, a VIP section at the House of Blues in Hollywood. On February 2nd, 2003, Lana spent the day with her mother. Because her job at the Hard Rock required her to spend long hours on her feet, Lana needed comfortable shoes. Her mom helped her, buying several pairs of flats for work. That evening, Lana reported for her shift where she was still in training. Spector spent the evening of February 2nd, 2003 at dinner with a platonic girlfriend at the Grill on the Alley. After dinner, Spector took his dinner date home and returned to the Grill to pick up a second date. He drank heavily at dinner and consumed more alcohol at Trader Vic's and Dan Tana's before heading to the House of Blues at around 2 a.m. on February 3rd, 2003. Lana and Spector had never met. In her first encounter with him, she thought he was a woman. Spector's second date left him shortly after his arrival at the Hard Rock. He was abusive and aggressive toward her. He was ordering a drink at the last restaurant, he was ordering a drink at like Trader Vic's, or when they got to the Hard Rock, and she didn't want a drink. She just wanted water. And he said, well, if you're going to drink water, you need to go the fuck home. I mean, he was abused. He was a little ogre, and he was abusive with these women. And I mean, abrasive and abusive beyond belief, which we'll get into a little bit later. But, you know, his second date went home because she didn't want to drink anymore. And he was demanding that she drink. He consumed more alcohol, first trying to pick up a waitress at the House of Blues. She turned him down, and then he turned his attention to Lana. Perhaps to make up for her earlier flub, Lana got permission to sit with Spector and keep him company. She declined his offer to go home with him initially. At closing time, Lana agreed to accept a ride to her car. At some point, she changed her mind and agreed to go back to Spector's Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra. She told Spector's driver that she was only going for one drink and nothing more. Spector and Lana went into the house after they arrived, leaving the driver outside to wait to take Lana back to Hollywood in her car. For 2 hours, all was quiet. Then the driver heard a gunshot, and Spector came out the back door, holding a revolver and saying, "I think I killed someone." The driver fled to call police, and Spector went back in the house. Based on what Alhambra police officers found when they arrived, Spector changed clothes, then used the remaining time to destroy evidence and manipulate the crime scene. Spector's fingerprints were wiped from the gun, Lana's head was moved, he attempted to clean blood from her face, and the gun was placed on the floor next to her left leg. Spector also came up with a story to tell police. Unfortunately, Spector's version was refuted by the blood spatter evidence found on Lana's wrist, which made it unlikely that she was the one to fire the fatal shot. So he was arrested on February 3rd, 2003 by Alhambra police. He immediately retained Robert Shapiro of O.J. Simpson fame to represent him. He was bailed out on $1 million bail, probably on or around February 3rd. He gave a statement, the sheriff's office issued a statement on March 11th, 2003, that they discounted suicide as Lana's cause of death. And one of the main things that really makes suicide improbable is that why would Lana go to a stranger's house, get a gun in that house that belongs to the stranger, and shoot herself?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes no sense.
That makes no sense. And also, Lana was found in a chair in the foyer right outside the back door. I mean, 5 feet from the back door with her purse on her shoulder. It appears that she was waiting to be let out the back door. And as we'll see when we hear about some of his other victims, Spector liked to hold women hostage and to force them to stay against their will. So Little Troll had abandonment issues. On September 22nd, 2003, the coroner ruled Lana's death as a homicide. So then there was a felony complaint filed on November 18, 2003 by the LA County Sheriff's Department, charging Spector with murder and use of a firearm during that murder. There was a grand jury held in September 2004. I would imagine that Shapiro and Spector's Dream Team attorneys were doing everything that they could to slow that process. And we got a lot of testimony regarding Spector's history of violence with women. The first was Dorothy M. Dorothy was the personal manager for Joan Rivers and occasionally dated Spector between 1989 and mid-1993. She described Spector as brilliant beyond belief and a very charming, lovable man when he wants to be. He is a wonderful person to be around, and when he is drinking and he gets to a certain point, then he totally loses it, and he becomes this demon. In July 1993, Dorothy visited Spector at his home in Pasadena. She had never been there before. During the evening, Spector drank a lot of vodka and was being very charming. Then he disappeared for a while, and Dorothy fell asleep on a couch. She awoke before daybreak and discovered Spector outside pointing a .38 snub-nosed revolver at her brand new car. Dorothy asked Spector what he was doing, and he told her to go back in the house. She refused and continued asking him what he was doing, so he hit her in the head with the gun, saying, "I told you to get the fuck into the house." And warning people, I'm going to just go ahead and I'm not going to clean up his language. I mean, he had a little potty mouth, and, that's going to be, we're not going to sugarcoat it. At that point, she returned to the house, and Spector followed her. He went through her purse, accusing her of stealing from him. He told her to take her clothes off and go up to the third floor, where she assumed his bedroom was. All the while, Spector was waving the gun around, sometimes pointing it at her. When Dorothy refused to take her clothes off, Spector hit her in the head with the gun again. She was terrified. She managed to retrieve her car keys, run out of the house, get into her car, and start driving, but the entrance gate was closed. As she sat in her car at the gate, Spector ran down the driveway with a pump-action shotgun. He worked the pump and screamed, "I told you to get the fuck out of here." When she told him the gate wouldn't open, Spector suddenly became calm and asked quizzically, "Gate won't open?" Then he said, "Well, I'm going to go back and open it." And he ran back to the house and opened the gate. Once she got through the gate, she called 911 and made a police report. Because her purse was still in the house. Police responded to the house and recovered her purse. She declined to press charges because of the potential bad publicity it would stir up for Joan Rivers. Stephanie J. In 1994, Stephanie, a photographer with a professional interest in the music business, began a long-distance dating relationship with Spector. She lived in Philadelphia and had an agency in New York, while Spector's primary residence was in Pasadena. In January 1995, Stephanie was Spector's guest at a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee award dinner and a Waldorf Astoria after party. After the party, Spector was drinking heavily, being unpleasant, and making obnoxious remarks. The more Spector drank, the louder and more boisterous he became. She left the party between 2 and 3 a.m. and took a taxi back to the Carlisle Hotel and fell asleep. She was awakened by one of Spector's bodyguards sent to ask her to join Spector in his room. She declined and went back to sleep. Shortly after that, Spector knocked on her door, asking her to join him in his suite. When she declined, Spector got angry, yelled at her, and demanded that she join him. He reminded her he was paying for her hotel room. He said if she didn't come to his suite, she'd have to leave and pay for her own hotel room. Stephanie said she would do just that. Spector entered her room, and they argued while she packed. Scared by Spector's anger, she was upset and crying. When she started packing up her things in the bathroom, the argument became more heated. Spector pushed or slapped her, causing her to fall backwards onto the toilet. She got up and pushed Spector, who fell into the bathtub, knocking down the shower curtain. Spector jumped up and left the room. As Stephanie finished packing, Spector returned. He pulled a chair in front of the door and sat down, blocking her exit. He had a gun in his hand. He was waving the gun around, sometimes pointing it at her. She was even more scared than before. She couldn't leave the hotel room because Spector was holding her at gunpoint. She sat on the bed crying and asked Spector to let her leave. Spector wouldn't let her leave with her bags, but since they contained her photographic equipment, she would not leave without them. She picked up the phone and called 911. Spector thought she was calling her mother and said, "You can call your mom all you want. There is nothing she can help you with now." The 911 operator managed to take a report with her only having to answer yes or no. Officers were dispatched and they came to the room with the hotel manager. Spector left Stephanie's room just before they arrived. Deborah R. In the 1970s, Deborah, a British pianist, worked for Spector as the administrative director of his record label, Warner Spector Records. Deborah idolized Spector and believed he was a genius. A year after she started working for him, they began a romantic relationship, which for her was an extramarital affair. During this time, Deborah frequently organized parties for Spector at his Beverly Hills home. She attended these parties as an employee, not as a guest. At one of these parties in around 1975, the guests had all gone and Deborah was standing in the foyer, very tired and wanting to leave. Because the door was locked, she asked Spector to let her out. Spector left the foyer for a few minutes. Deborah waited there with her purse and jacket when she felt the barrel of a gun touch her temple. She turned and saw Spector holding a shotgun. He had been drinking that night and he was very drunk. Spector said, "If you try to leave, I'm going to blow your fucking head off." When Deborah said she had to leave, Spector swore and shouted at her, saying things like, "I'm going to blow your head off. I'll blow your brains out. You can't leave. I'm not unlocking the door." He was still holding the gun to her head. Deborah stood her ground, saying, "Just stop it. This is ridiculous. I just want to go home." Suddenly, Spector's demeanor changed. I remember him just sort of, I can't describe it any other way. He just sort of relaxed, and the moment passed, and he went and got the keys and unlocked the door and let me go. There was a little moment of suspension, and then he became Phil again. I didn't recognize the other maniac.
Yeah, he's definitely insane.
Yeah, I mean,
Clearly.
it's
something brought on by alcohol or something. There's definitely two of them.
Yeah. Well, I think he was misogynistic because his mother mistreated him.
Yeah.
And maybe his older sister didn't give him as much support as he felt he was entitled to. As a result of this incident, their romantic relationship ended, and then a year later, Deborah ended their business relationship. She returned to England and had a musical career for 5 or 6 years. In 1986, she moved back to the U.S., reestablished contact with Spector, and accepted a part-time job with him in Los Angeles. That same year, Deborah went to a party at Spector's house. By the time all the guests had gone, it was very late, possibly dawn. Deborah was tired and wanted to leave, but the door was locked. She found Spector and asked him to let her out. He was drunk. Deborah stood near the front door in the foyer, waiting to leave. Suddenly, Spector pointed a shotgun at her face. He was swearing and making threats. "I'll blow your head off. I'll shoot you. I'll kill you. I'll blow your brains out. I could shoot you right now." He was angry, sinister, shouting, bulging veins. There was a look in his eyes that wasn't the look that is him. Deborah told him to put the gun down and let her leave. At one point, Spector went away, leaving Deborah in the foyer, still unable to leave. Spector returned, and the situation started to unwind, and he started to unwind, and the tension broke again like it had the first time, and he unlocked the door. Again, there had been a sudden change in Spector's mood. She left and quit her job with Spector. She testified he had been drunk during both the 1975 and the 1986 incidents. Diane O. Diane worked in the entertainment industry in 1982. After having been introduced by Spector's publicist, she accepted a dinner invitation from him. At the restaurant, Spector drank alcohol. Afterward, they went to tour his Beverly Hills house. After seeing the house and talking with Spector, Diane said she needed to go home because she had to work the next day. Spector did not want her to leave. He disappeared, and Diane got ready to go, putting her purse over her shoulder. Then she heard a buzzer go off. Spector had locked the door using a remote control. Diane pleaded with him to let her leave. She begged him some more, and he finally unlocked the door and let her leave. From 1982 until 1988, Diane and Spector kept in touch. When Diane was between jobs in 1988, she accepted Spector's offer to be his paid assistant. In March 1989, she went to his house in Pasadena, where he was entertaining some people. Spector drank alcohol during the evening. About midnight, as people were leaving, Diane said she was going to go home. Spector didn't want her to leave. He went away, and she put her purse on her arm in preparation for leaving. Spector then appeared with a rifle and screamed, "You're not fucking leaving." Diane testified he seemed to have become demonic. He was talking and screaming, not being him. He was just like taken over by something. I don't know what, but he wasn't Philip. Diane sat down. Then Spector pointed a pistol at her, touching her face with it and screaming that he was going to blow her brains out. He ordered her to go upstairs to his bedroom, where, at gunpoint, he made her partially disrobe. He then tried unsuccessfully to have intercourse with her. Diane testified she had never had sexual relationship with Spector. That is attempted rape, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep.
A few months later, Diane was at Spector's house with a couple of other people. After the others left, Diane got ready to leave again. Once again, Spector disappeared. Then from behind her, he screamed, "You're not going anywhere. I can't stand the sound of your voice." He said, "I have an Uzi here. I'm going to kill you." He was holding some kind of gun. Diane said, "Philip, stop it. I'm just going to go home and don't do this to me again. Please, you're drinking too much." She fled to her car and got in. Spector ran and banged the Uzi on her window while yelling at her. Diane ducked down as she drove away fast because she thought he was going to shoot her car. And then finally, we have Melissa G. In 1991, Melissa was working as a waitress in New York. She developed a romantic but platonic relationship with Spector. In late 1992 or early 1993, she accepted an invitation to visit him in California using an airline ticket he bought for her. They went out to dinner at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Spector had alcohol with his meal. At 11 p.m., they went to Spector's house in Pasadena. Melissa was tired and had jet lag. Spector had another drink. By this time, he was a little drunk. Between 1 and 2 a.m., Melissa was getting very tired and wanted to leave. As soon as I told him I wanted to go, he turned and looked at me, pointed his finger, and he said, "What?" And his whole demeanor changed. And he said, "You just wait. Wait right there." Spector walked off. Melissa sat down in a chair with her purse next to her. Spector returned a few minutes later with a handgun. He walked up to her, pointed the gun a couple of inches from her face, and said, "If you try to leave, I'm going to kill you." He was irate. He put the gun into a shoulder holster he was wearing. Melissa believed Spector would shoot her if she tried to leave, so she stayed in the chair. She didn't say anything. She just cried. Eventually, she fell asleep. She awoke the next morning when Spector tapped her on the foot. He wasn't wearing the holster, and he no longer had the gun. He appeared to be back to normal. So that, I mean, that sounds exactly what happened with Lana.
When there's a lot of weird things about this, but I mean, the fact, I know this is weird and subtle, but like the fact that he has a holster, just, I don't know, something about it makes it even weirder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like these weird little subtle cues you can pick up on that there's definitely a few screws loose with these guys.
Well, I think, yeah, I think he really would have benefited from psychological and or psychiatric help.
Yeah.
Because I think he had a lot of things. I mean, he was always, put on or held as a genius and the best music producer ever, and he had all this success. But I think inside he was this weird, ugly little Jewish kid, and he just could not, he couldn't move on from that.
Right.
And eventually he started getting angry. And I think it started in the 60s when he was married to Ronnie. Because if you've seen Ronnie Spector, I mean, she was a beautiful girl.
Yep.
Incredibly beautiful girl. And this is a little troll. Ogre. And because of the accident in 1974, that's why he was wearing the wigs. So, and he wore the outlandish, stupid looking wigs, and, he tried to be hip, and it was just, he was just, he was creepy. Also at the grand jury, Spector's driver testified about his statement that, "I think I killed somebody." And Alhambra police officer Beatrice Rodriguez testified that she heard Spector say, "I didn't mean to shoot her. It was an accident." So on September 20th, 2004, Spector was indicted for murder and use of a firearm. On February 3rd, 2005, Lana's mother filed a wrongful death action against Spector and his insurance company. So now we move into the pretrial stage. And this is where it gets interesting, because the Phil Spector case really took down Henry Lee. in addition to Spector. And we'll get into that. So the case was filed in Los Angeles Superior Court, and it was there may have been a different judge initially, but everything I found said Judge Larry Paul Fiedler. Even though there's no E in that name, it's Fiedler, I believe. The state was represented at that time by Doug Sortino. Spector was being represented by Robert Shapiro, Bruce Cutler, Linda Kinney Bodden, Christopher Plord, Leslie Abramson, Marsha Morrissey, and Ronald Richards. Shapiro was fired on February 2nd, 2004, and the reasoning for that will become obvious very shortly. His experts were Dr. Henry Lee, Dr. Werner Spitz, Dr. Vincent DeMaio, Dr. Michael Bodden, and there were probably a lot of other experts whose names I just wasn't able to document. On July 2nd, 2003, while at a sheriff's department party or barbecue for July 4th, and in the presence of homicide detectives with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Stan White, who was working as a defense investigator for Shapiro, bragged about the discovery of a piece of Lana Clarkson's fingernail during a defense examination of the foyer of Spector's mansion. The information was reported to the DA's office, as it should have been. October 2003, apparently Shapiro, in an effort to cast aspersions at the investigation, told prosecutors that investigators missed a critical piece of physical evidence at the crime scene and that his team had collected the item. However, Shapiro refused demands to turn the evidence over, which then led to a motion being filed and the prosecution seeking to compel the defense to turn this over immediately. There was a hearing held to evaluate the allegations that Dr. Henry Lee found a torn fingernail in the foyer of Spector's mansion. The defense continued to deny that it possessed any such evidence. Without taking testimony from Lee, Judge Carlos Uranga accepted the defense denials and set a status conference in the case for September 14th, 2004, and a preliminary hearing for October 20th, 2004. Then there was a break in the case. I think Sortino was appointed to a judgeship, so the case kind of languished. And I think I have that somewhere in the wrong spot, so my apologies, people. So then in April of 2007, the hidden evidence becomes an issue again. Greg Diamond, a former clerk for Robert Shapiro, comes forward with allegations regarding the defense team's possession of crime scene evidence not turned over to the state. On April 23rd, 2005, oh yeah, I'm out of order here, sorry. April 23rd, 2005, the state was allowed, based on an order from the judge, to present the evidence of Spector pulling guns on women in the past. Spector's motion to suppress statements he made on the night of Lana's murder was denied on October 13, 2005. And then Sortino was appointed to a judgeship in December of 2005. So my notes are out of order. Sorry, people. And then jury selection was set to begin on March 19, 2007, on January 16, 2007, by order of the court. And then an order allowing the trial to be televised was entered on February 16, 2007. So in April, after the trial started, is when Diamond came forward and said, yeah, the defense found evidence at the crime scene and they didn't turn it over to the state. So the first trial was held in 2007. It was in Los Angeles Superior Court, and they held it in the downtown Los Angeles courtroom because of the media interest.
That's similar to OJ.
Similar to OJ, exactly like OJ. Judge Larry Paul Fiedler was the judge. The state was now being represented by Alan Jackson. Spector was represented.
I just joke. I said not the country singer.
Not the country singer, but I'm not sure. He might be Karen Reed's attorney now.
Oh no.
I'm not entirely positive. I came across that today when I saw Alan Jackson affidavit, and I opened it up and I'm like, that's not Phil Spector's case. So remains to be seen. Although I don't see how a California attorney would now be practicing in Massachusetts. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that's not true. So Spector was now being represented by Cutler, Linda Kinney Bodden, Christopher Plord, Leslie Abramson, Marsha Morrissey, Roger Rosen, and Dennis.
No, I'm not to interrupt you, but yes, it does appear to be the same person on his website. He has both,
oh my God,
Karen Reed and Phil Spector.
Oh my God, Alan.
But he was the prosecutor for Phil Spector.
He was the prosecutor for Phil Spector.
Yeah, they've got him on there as the Spector trial prosecutor, Alan Jackson.
He went over to the dark side for the cookies.
Yeah, he went to the dark side.
Okay, so jury selection was held between March 19th and April 16th.
Oh, sorry, just for the record, he is a graduate of the University of Texas.
Oh, okay. What law school?
Pepperdine, which explains
okay.
the California connection.
Yeah. Is he licensed in Massachusetts?
He has to be, right? I would guess so. Unless he was just like being a co-counsel.
He theoretically could be pro hoc vice. I mean, what's the address on his website?
I'm trying to find it. Yeah, he says, because of my experience as a former Los Angeles district attorney, I understand criminal cases from every angle. What is his? Yeah, he's still in Los Angeles, 888 West 6th Street.
So he must have been pro hoc vice.
Yeah, it must have been something, yeah.
Or he holds dual. He could hold dual licensing.
Right.
Okay. Well, if he's a former prosecutor, he should know that if the court does not address where the jury stood on any of the charges when it declares a mistrial, then it doesn't mean shit about the next trial. It only means shit if the jury says we acquit on this count, but we can't reach a decision on any others. But if they say we just can't reach a decision, then all counts remain on the table. But apparently not. And he thinks a juror coming to you and telling you, oh no, we acquitted her on that, is going to fly. So, all right, let's not go off the tracks. Bad Kyle, bad Lisa. So anyway, so the voir dire, apparently what they do is jury selection is probably a 2-stage process in this case. They have the panels come in, they get rid of the people that have hardships, they get rid of the people that can be dismissed for cause because they already have opinion about the case, or they know a party, or they know the victim, or they know attorneys, or they absolutely despise Bruce Cutler, or they despise Leslie Abrams, or they despise Alan Jackson, or they have family members that are doing time in California correctional institutions. And then with the people left, they get the questionnaires and they begin the voir dire, which is where you question. Now, sometimes that questioning occurs to willow out the panel from the beginning. And sometimes, especially when you have a high profile case, you get rid of the people that aren't going to be qualified to serve. And then with the people that are left, that's when you start the willowing process and the voir dire. That went from April 16th to April 19th, 2007. And these dates are approximate because reports had different dates. I did late in the game, I found a really good trial resource But by that time, it was too late for me to go through and fact check my notes. So if it was really April 18th that they finished the jury selection and the jury was sworn, that's on me. Sorry. But the jury was sworn on April 19th. There were 9 men, 3 women, and then 7 alternates, 4 men and 3 women. And this, I think, could be a potential reason why it ended in a mistrial. So, just saying, because there were 9 men. Opening statements were held April 25th, 2007. And if it weren't for Henry Lee, I would not go this far into the weeds with the first trial, because I had to, because what happened with Henry Lee, because it happened in the first trial. Then the trial was suspended. They did their opening statements and they began presenting evidence. And then on May 2nd, 2007, the trial was suspended because Bruce Cutler was ill, supposedly. Bruce Cutler kept leaving and going back to New York, and he was doing a TV show for Court TV or one of the CNN or one of the news channels. So Bruce Cutler was not as devoted to Phil Spector as he had been to John Gotti. Because those of you who don't recognize the name, he was the attorney who got John Gotti off. And in fact, the last time Gotti was tried, Cutler, I think, was disqualified from representing him. And that was why John Gotti was convicted. Because there were some things that went on that they couldn't really pin on Cutler, but his representation became questionable. So, but I don't remember the facts of that. So I'm just gonna, but what I remember was he was disqualified. Anyway, so there was a special hearing held on May 2nd, 2007 to May 4th, 2007, roughly. And this was to take testimony regarding allegations that the defense team possessed hidden evidence. Greg Diamond, a former clerk for Robert Shapiro, testified that he went to the crime scene with Shapiro, Dr. Bodden, Sarah Kaplan, another attorney for Spector, and Dr. Lee. Diamond testified that Kaplan discovered a small white object on the floor in the foyer near where Lana was killed. He testified that she picked the object up and handed it to Dr. Bodden. Diamond further testified that the defense team passed the object around and that Bodden identified it as a tooth fragment. Dr. Bodden denied Diamond's account in his testimony, saying that identifying something as a tooth fragment is outside his expertise as a pathologist. That is, unless he was working for the defense and it would benefit his client, and then he would do whatever it took, even if it means identifying something as a tooth fragment from a picture. But I digress. He was cross-examined about a missing piece of Clarkson's acrylic fingernail and said he knew nothing about its whereabouts. Kaplan admitted in her testimony that she pointed out a small flat white object with uneven edges to Dr. Lee, who picked the object up and placed it in a vial. Her testimony contradicted Lee's official report, in which he claimed the things he recovered were 2 white threads and some carpet fibers taken for samples. He also said he didn't use vials. He only put things in bindles. Stan White, the investigator who probably started this shit show, he testified that he was at the scene and also saw Lee pick up a small white object and hold it in a piece of tissue or handkerchief. White testified that he identified the object as a piece of fingernail, which Lee disputed. White testified that he told Lee he needed glasses. Lee testified that he didn't see an object, never had an object, and again, put things in bindles, not vials. On May 7th, 2007, Judge Fiedler appointed Lori Levinson, a professor at Loyola Law School, to look into the matter of the missing evidence and whether Dr. Lee took evidence from the crime scene that wasn't turned over. The trial resumed on May 7th through May 23rd, 2007. On May 23rd, there was a second hearing on the hidden evidence issue. And after arguments by counsel, Judge Fiedler rendered his decision on the record. His findings of fact were as follows, and these are verbatim: that Dr. Lee did recover an item. It is flat, it is white, it has irregular edges. I am unable to say that it is a fingernail. It is the size of a fingernail, and that's all I can say. That item has never been presented to the prosecution, and those are my factual findings. Now, we'll talk about remedies. Normally, the remedy, when I say normally, there haven't been that many cases. There are certainly recorded cases and reported cases, and we talked about those. Is for the court, when it finds that an object has been secreted or kept from the prosecution, is to order the party who has it to produce it. That's what you do. That's the first remedy. You say, give it over to the prosecution. The prosecution, in essence, concedes that object is no longer with us, that if it ever, and clearly the court has found some object existed, but there is no object to order Dr. Lee to produce. It would be a hollow order. To the extent that I can make an order, if Dr. Lee has this object, he is to produce it forthwith. Now, on a side note, at some point when asked about this, Lee said that I did try to turn it over. I asked the prosecution, or I asked the state if they wanted it, and they told me no. But nowhere is that written in a report. Nowhere is that documented in any notes by Dr. Lee to corroborate that claim. So after the shit hit the fan, then he says, oh, I did offer to give it to him, and they said they didn't want it. So that's why they didn't get it. I think Dr. Lee at that point was just, he's one of those many experts that his accolades and his success had gone to his head.
Yeah.
And so now he believes he's infallible because of all the accolades. And so when he makes a mistake, he won't admit that he made a mistake.
Right.
It was always somebody else's fault.
Yep, never his fault.
Now, if I knew he had it and he didn't produce it, the remedy is contempt of court. I don't see it going there because I don't think he is now. I mean, if he has it, if it suddenly appears, I order it to be produced. I don't see going to the contempt sanction because I think it would be useless. You don't impose contempt when it is useless and does not have the coercive effect that it was meant to have. And I'm not going to hold Dr. Lee in contempt. So now we come to the position of, what do I do? What is the remedy, if any? The remedy is, and I agree with something Mr. Plord said, the people are presented a prospective jury instruction, which basically has me tell the jury that I have made findings that Dr. Lee is not credible. I'll paraphrase, and to use it as they have set forth, that interjects me into the case to a degree that is inappropriate. Judges should not be a part of the case, and it substitutes my findings of fact for theirs. The jury is the fact finder in this case. I make preliminary findings of fact as to what evidence may be put before them, but I don't make ultimate conclusions of that nature. It's inappropriate, it carries way too much weight, and also it can't be cross-examined. It can't be really argued, and that's inappropriate. So I'm not going to tell a jury that I find Dr. Lee has withheld a piece of evidence, but the people, when he testifies, if he testifies, may present all this evidence to question his credibility. He may be cross-examined on it, and you may present witnesses, the witnesses that have testified in front of me, and any other witnesses that you choose. And the defense may present any witness that they choose on this subject. And the jury will be told, and it must be limited under California law, the existing law, and it's very clear when you talk about either untimely disclosure of evidence or evidence tampering, if the jury cannot trace this to Mr. Spector, and there is no evidence to support that whatsoever, then you cannot allow them to speculate or use it against him on a consciousness of guilt. They have to be instructed and will be told that the sole purpose this can be used for is the impeachment of Dr. Lee. To the extent it does or does not impeach him, if the people choose to go there, then the jury may consider that. They will be told, and I have, of course, I can't finalize any words at this time or any appropriate instruction. The sole purpose for considering that is in considering his credibility, and they'll find what they find. That's basically it. But it won't be used against Mr. Spector on the issue of guilt or innocence. It cannot be. The law is very prescribed on that, but clearly the people may go forward. We will worry about the language of any instruction to make appropriate, to have the jury make appropriate credibility findings as to Dr. Lee. He wasn't called. Lee was never called to testify.
Yeah,
So,
probably a good thing.
then the trial resumed, including testimony regarding the missing evidence, because Sarah Kaplan and apparently the state found a way to get the missing evidence in there. And I think part of that was probably because this was a piece of fingernail that they believe came from when Lana tried to block being shot, tried to protect herself. And so when the defense was arguing she shot herself, she had the gun, she held the gun, then they were able to get this testimony in that there was a piece of her fingernail that corroborates defensive wound. Now, you don't have to rely on me. You can watch Phil Spector's entire first trial on Court TV. And I believe it's also on YouTube. So, have at it. Enjoy. But I think it's really interesting because this was the beginning of the end for Dr. Lee. Closing arguments were held.
What happened to him after that? Did he retire?
He went on, he continued working, and he went on. He was involved in the Casey Anthony case in 2011 or 2009. But in 2018, 2019, maybe later than that, he was held to have wrongfully convicted someone. And I think a hefty award was made to the wrongfully convicted person against Dr. Lee. I kind of touched on it when I was doing my research, but I didn't go there because I ran out of time. And so I just wanted to talk about it as the Spector case, but yeah, he was found to have wrongfully convicted. He was provided false evidence in a wrongful conviction case. And I may look at that case at some point. If not this season, then next season, because it would be interesting to look at that case.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting one.
So
crazy.
You can go to his webpage, his Wikipedia page, which reports what happened. It might have been 2021. So, closing arguments, state and defense, state rests, defense rests. The jury are instructed, and the instruction appears to be on the 8th. Deliberations begin on the 10th. On the I don't know why it would take them so long. I guess they had a break and they worked on instructions, and then the jury came in on the 10th and were instructed. And then there was another break because deliberations didn't actually. Oh, no, sorry. I'm sorry, people. I'm just having a day today. Okay, so on September 18th, the jury reports that they're in an impasse. They get the dynamite charge or Allen charge or whatever it's called in California. They go back to deliberations and resume on the 20th with new instructions, which included, I think, elimination of an instruction that was causing problems with the jury. On September 26, 2007, the jury states that it cannot reach a verdict. Deliberations lasted 44 hours over 12 days. A mistrial is declared on September 27, 2007. The jury is reported by different sources. One source reports being deadlocked 7-5 after 43 hours of deliberation, but no idea what the 7-5 breakdown was. But then there are other reports that the jury was deadlocked 10-2 for conviction. There was a status conference on October 3rd, 2007. During that time, during that October, Spector also got rid of Cutler and Linda Kenny Bodden and most of the other defense attorneys except for Dennis Reardon and Christopher Plord. And there was another female attorney whose name I never found. Well, I didn't come across it. Because when you search Phil Spector, you get a shit ton of articles. Then in March 2008, they filed a motion to remove Judge Fiedler, alleging numerous acts of bias by the judge during Spector's first trial, including imposing a gag order on Spector's wife and a potential defense witness, Dr. Lee, and his decision to withdraw jury instruction and craft a new one after jurors announced they were deadlocked. There was a declaration filed by Judge Fiedler that said he was not biased or prejudiced against any party in the case, and further stated that the motion was untimely and that the acts alleged should have been addressed when they occurred at the trial. An order was entered on March 26, 2008, denying the motion to remove Judge Fiedler. An order was entered on April 11, 2008 in the appellate court, which denied the request to appoint a neutral judge to determine whether Judge Fiedler should be removed from the retrial. So the retrial is back on, it's going forward. Jackson remained counsel for the state. Spector was represented by Doran Weinberg, Christopher Plord, Dennis Reardon, and there was a female attorney. Like I said, I don't know her name. Jury selection was held October 20th through about October 29th. The trial went from October 29th, 2008 to March 23rd, 2009. The jury deliberations started on the 23rd of March and continued on until April 13th, 19 days apparently. And then Spector was convicted of second-degree murder using a firearm on April 13th, 2009. He was sentenced on May 29th, 2009 to 19 years to life in prison. He would have been eligible for parole this year. And he was transferred on May 29, 2009 to the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility in Corcoran, California. There's also I think like a diagnostic facility where they try to determine where a prisoner should go within the system. He was represented by Dennis Reardon and Donald M. Horgan on appeal. The state was represented by the Attorney General's office, which at that time was Edmund G. Brown. Kamala Harris also was Attorney General at another point in the saga. So the errors that Spector claimed at trial were the trial court erred by admitting into evidence the videotape of a witness's testimony from the first trial. The trial court erred by admitting other crimes evidence concerning Spector's gun assaults on other women. The trial court erred by admitting generic threat evidence, and there was prosecutorial misconduct during closing argument. Oral argument was held on April 12th, 2011. The decision was rendered on May 2nd, 2011, and the conviction and sentence were affirmed. The court held that a key question at trial was what the resulting forensic evidence would have been if Clarkson, rather than Spector, had fired the gun. In this regard, Spector contends the trial court erred by admitting into evidence a videotape in which the trial judge purportedly acted as a witness for the prosecution. We will hold, however, that this videotape merely shows the trial judge seeking to clarify a prosecution criminalist's ambiguous testimony. Spector contends the trial court erred by admitting the other crimes evidence consisting of testimony from 5 women who, over a 20-year period, were the victims of armed assaults by Spector. We will conclude this evidence was properly admitted to prove Spector's motive for committing implied malice murder and that Clarkson's death was not self-inflicted. We will conclude the trial court properly admitted generic threat evidence tending to show Spector's state of mind at the time of his fatal encounter with Clarkson, and that the jury was properly instructed on how to consider all of this evidence. Finally, we will reject Spector's contention there was prosecutorial misconduct during closing argument and conclude the prosecution neither impugned the personal integrity of defense counsel nor improperly attacked the credibility of the defense expert witnesses. And this was based on a comment that the prosecutor did imply that Spector bought forensic opinions that supported his version of the facts, but it didn't cross the line in the way that it was done. So then on May 5th, 2011, a modified opinion was issued. Basically what the court did was they inserted an introduction before the background section of their original opinion, and that introduction read, Phil Spector was convicted of murdering Lana Clarkson, a woman he met one night at the House of Blues nightclub in Los Angeles, where she was working. Clarkson accepted Spector's invitation to visit his home. They were driven there by Adriano D'Souza, Spector's chauffeur. According to D'Souza, Spector came out of the house 2 hours later with a revolver in his hand and said he killed someone. The police subsequently found Clarkson's body slumped in a chair near the back door of Spector's house. There was a revolver on the floor underneath one of her legs. She had been shot once in the head and neck, the bullet having entered through her mouth. Spector and Clarkson were the only 2 people inside the home when Clarkson was shot. The question at trial was whether Spector had committed implied malice murder by killing Clarkson in the course of assaulting her with the gun, or whether Clarkson had used the gun to shoot herself, either committing suicide or killing herself accidentally. Because Spector could not be convicted solely on the basis of his extrajudicial confession to D'Souza, the prosecution sought to provide corroborating evidence in the form of crime scene forensics and other crimes evidence demonstrating his long history of violence toward women in similar situations. Spector did not testify. The defense put on forensic and mental state evidence trying to show Spector could not have fired the gun and that Clarkson had reason to commit suicide. And then the other addition was the holdings that I read before. So on May 26, 2011, the opinion was modified again, although I don't know how, because that was not published, and Spector's request for rehearing was denied.
Did they ever give a reason about why they thought she would want to commit suicide?
Well, they claimed that she was, her career was fading and she wasn't getting as many jobs and she wasn't making enough money, and she was using drugs and drinking and had drug and alcohol problems, which are not true. I mean, they smeared her character. She may have been a little, especially after what had happened with her breaking her wrists, which was nearly a year or more than a year of recovery. Because she severely broke both wrists. I mean, she was hospitalized, she had surgeries, then she had rehab. So they were just trashing her character. But again, she was reinventing herself. She was doing stand-up comedy. She did her Lana Unleashed. She had booked 2 modeling jobs, 2 good modeling jobs. One as a spokesmodel for Siemens. So, she wasn't, they painted her as despondent, but she really wasn't. And people who knew her knew she wasn't. I mean, even when she shopped with her mom, she was hopeful. And, yeah, she hated the House of Blues job, but she needed to make ends meet, so that's what she did. And she could sometimes be dramatic, like I'm at the end of my rope and I'm just going to chuck it all, and but that's not. And she certainly, if that was the case, she's not going to go to a stranger's house and do it in his house. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So,
yeah.
and
Yeah, it
Spector,
doesn't make any sense.
yeah, and Spector was angry at the cops. He thought the cops should never have bothered him. And then it became her fault. And if you go to Murderpedia, you can read his 2 statements to the police. And I didn't print them out because they're image files instead of a single PDF. And but I mean, he was abrasive, he was abusive, he was ugly, he was nasty. He was a little freaking ogre who just thought, he was the best thing since sliced fucking bread. And I wish I had met him, because if that little MFer had hit me, I would have beaten the living shit out of him. He would have been terrified of women from that point, because I would have just unleashed on him, and he would have come out of it on the shitty end of the stick. And as drunk as he was, I probably would have been able to get the gun from him and shoot him.
Yeah, no.
I know that's just like speculative, but I still feel like a man hits me, my mama raised me to turn into a wildcat from hell and beat the living snot out of him. Because that's what she would have done to my father if he'd ever hit her, and he knew that. So anyway, okay, so his review was denied on August 17th, 2011 by the California Supreme Court. Of course, they filed on November 8th, 2011. They filed a request for extension of time at the U.S. Supreme Court, which was granted, making the petition due on December 15th, 2011. They filed the petition on December 15th, 2011. It was assigned docket number 11-761. And basically the questions presented was, does the due process clause permit the prosecution to rely on evidence from the trial judge and to display the judge's photograph as that of a key prosecution witness during closing argument? Does the confrontation clause permit the prosecution to introduce at trial a videotape of statements and gestures of the trial judge made at a pretrial evidentiary hearing and never subjected to cross-examination as proof of the guilt of a criminal defendant? That is a very creative way of framing that issue, because that isn't what happened. It isn't what happened on the videotape. It isn't what happened at trial. But, this is Dennis Reardon, and we know he was an excellent fiction writer from his work with the West Memphis Three and Damien Eccles.
Right.
And this is how worried the state of California was. On February 9th, 2012, they waived their right to respond to Spector's petition. Conference was held on February 17th, 2012, and then on February 21st, 2012, Spector's writ was denied, so his conviction and sentence became final. Spector does not appear to have filed a state post-conviction claim. Constitutional issues were included in his direct appeal, so a separate post-conviction relief action was never filed. Now, California law does recognize 12 specific types of post-conviction relief actions: motion to withdraw a plea, motion for new trial, writ of habeas corpus, which this could have fallen under, resentencing, early termination of probation, commutation, exclusion from Morgan's list, expungement, certificate of rehabilitation, restoration of gun rights, sealing juvenile records, or conviction review. But again, because they raised the constitutional issues in the direct appeal, they didn't file a separate, and it appears California may even permit writ of habeas corpus and direct appeal to be pursued at the same time. I base that solely on Scott Peterson and the fact that he pursued a writ of habeas corpus while his direct appeal was still pending. Federal habeas, he was represented by Dennis P. Reardon, Donald Horgan, and Charles M. Sevilla, who was retained on June 18, 2014. Now, this is also probably one of the reasons a separate writ of habeas corpus for ineffective assistance of counsel was never filed, because he was still being represented by the same attorneys who represented him at the trial and on direct appeal. But he was paying a buttload of money for these attorneys, so. But I got to question whether it's ethical for Dennis Reardon not to withdraw after he's convicted or after his direct appeal is denied and turn it over to some other attorney to evaluate post-conviction. But anyway, so he went to federal habeas, U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, Western Division, Los Angeles. The judge was the Honorable S. James Otero. The magistrate judge was the Honorable Paul M. Abrams, or Paul L. Abrams. And the case was assigned docket number 2:12-CV 05288-SJO-PLA. The grounds raised were the trial judge deprived petitioner of his constitutional right to an impartial judge by allowing the prosecutor to introduce a videotape from petitioner's first trial containing testimonial statements by the trial judge, which was at his petition at 5. The trial judge violated petitioner's Sixth Amendment right to confront the witnesses against him by allowing the prosecutor to introduce into evidence the trial judge's testimonial statements from petitioner's first trial. Prosecutor deprived petitioner of his right to due process in a fair trial by arguing that the trial judge was a prosecution witness, and that was at 6. And then the prosecutor deprived petitioner of his right to due process in fair trial by attacking defense counsel's integrity and arguing that petitioner used his wealth to purchase false testimony, and that was the petition at 5. Again, demonstrating Dennis Reardon's creative writing skills. This was all filed on June 18, 2012, along with a consent to proceed before a magistrate judge. The order requiring response to petition from the state was entered on June 27, 2012. That notice of appearance was required by July 9th, and then a motion to dismiss was required no later than July 27th, or answer and return to petition no later than August 13th. The warden did file a notice of appearance on July 9th. On July 26th, a request for extension of time was granted on July 26th. And then on September 7th, 2012, an opposition, they filed a second request for extension in September. Spector opposed that on September 7th, and then the court granted the extension of time, and that made the answer due by October 12th, 2012. I guess they weren't going to file a motion to dismiss. They were going to answer. And they filed that on October 12th, 2012. They also lodged the trial court record. Spector filed a reply on November 19th. On November 13th, he was also granted leave to file a traverse and a supporting memorandum in excess of 25 pages. The court entered an order on December 2nd, 2013, accepting supplemental authorities filed by Spector. It says filed on December 14th, so I think I might have the 20. It was probably December 20th, not December 2nd. My apologies. Notice of appearance was filed by Charles Sevilla on June 18th, 2014. Another supplement was filed July 1st. The judge, they also filed something to try and get a report and recommendation entered because of Spector's age. they wanted to get him out of prison, and so they needed the judge to, render a decision. A report and recommendation was filed on June 19th, 2015. It was submitted to the judge and recommended that the petition for writ of habeas corpus be dismissed with prejudice, and analyzed all of Spector's claims and the evidence and the state court's handling of those claims, and finding that the state court's handling was reasonable and not in violation of any Supreme Court precedent available to Spector. Spector filed an objection to the report and recommendation on July 2nd, 2015, which basically said the magistrate got it all wrong, the facts are all wrong, and we don't agree with the facts. And, then on July 11th, 2015, the district judge entered an order accepting the report and recommendation, denying the objections, and engaging in a de novo review of those portions of the report and recommendation to which objections have been made. They accepted the recommendations, and then judgment shall be entered consistent with this order. The clerk shall order to serve the order on and judgment on the parties. Pursuant to the order accepting the magistrate's report and recommendation, the judgment was entered, denying relief and dismissing with prejudice. And that was on July 11th, 2015. On the same date, the court denied the application for certificate of appealability. A notice of appeal was filed to the Ninth Circuit, which was assigned docket number 15-56145. Spector filed a motion for certificate of appealability on August 12th, 2015. He filed a citation of supplemental authorities on May 6th. An order denying his COA request was entered on June 10th by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. He filed a motion for miscellaneous relief on June 22nd, basically seeking the reconsideration of his request for a COA. That was denied on August 24th, 2016. He filed a writ with the U.S. Supreme Court under docket number 16-716 on November 22nd, 2016. The warden, again, California was not worried about Phil Spector. They waived response on December 6, 2016. A conference was held on January 6, 2017, and the writ was denied on January 9, 2017. So that's pretty much, that was the end of Spector's challenge to his conviction. Now, we're kind of going to go back in time because we're going to talk about some ancillary things that went on during this period. The first of which is, while awaiting trial for murder of a statuesque younger blonde woman, Phil Spector meets a waitress named Rochelle Short, 26 years old. She was 23 when he first met her in 2003. What does he do? On September 1st, 2006, he marries her in the foyer of his castle. After he went to prison, she managed to release a CD called Out of My Shell, with Spector credited as a producer, which was his first production in 30 years. In the wrongful death suit in June of 2010, there was a status conference, and the parties agreed at that time to participate in mediation. The court entered an order that gave the parties until October 22nd, 2010 to complete mediation. Apparently, mediation was unsuccessful because on April 29, 2011, the wrongful death suit was set for trial beginning in January of 2012. In December 14, 2011, the parties were able to reach a settlement for an unspecified amount. This was probably paid by Spector's insurance rather than Spector personally, because that's how it usually works. And during this time, Rochelle Spector is spending Phil's money because he's in prison. He doesn't have control over it anymore. He gets $300 a month on his books, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't know if she was a genius. I'm fascinated by the women who fall in love with death row, people in
yeah.
prison. But I guess if she was able to spend all his money, she was pretty smart.
Well, she had moved into the castle, and she had been living there with him. And then when he went to prison, she continued living there. And she did spend money updating it, fixing it. I think with the ultimate goal of them being able to sell the property at some point in time. But at that time, she was buying cars. She was buying a plane because she became a pilot. So yeah, she was spending his money. A movie, Phil Spector, premiered on HBO on March 24th, 2013. It was written and directed by David Mamet, who didn't believe that the evidence against Spector proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Linda Kenny Bodden served as a consultant on the film. Al Pacino starred as Spector, and Helen Mirren played Kenny Bodden. Now, they only looked at the lead up to the first trial and the first trial. They did not mention Henry Lee's concealing evidence. They did not mention the allegations by Dorothy or any of the other Stephanie or any of the victims, other than for Spector to imply that, or Al Pacino as Spector to imply that they just came out of the woodwork and he didn't even know who these women were. But it also showed Spector as a liar. When, Bruce Cutler left with Spector's permission, he's talking to Linda Kenny Bodden, pretending like, no, I didn't know he was leaving. I thought he was just temporarily going to New York. I didn't know he was leaving my defense. And he got really incensed when they brought up Ronnie Spector and her allegations. So I watched it on HBO last night. Al Pacino, it was like the character in what is that Keanu Reeves movie about the Devil's Advocate?
Oh yeah.
It was that character with more of a Brooklyn accent or a Bronx accent. I mean, I wonder how could Spector have maintained the Bronx accent when he moved to California at 10?
Yeah.
But maybe because he wouldn't get rid of the Bronx accent is one of the reasons the kids picked on him. Who knows? Anyway, so in October of 2013, Spector was transferred to the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton, which treats 6 inmates. He filed a petition for divorce on March 18, 2016 in Superior Court in San Joaquin County against Rochelle because she was spending all his money. She filed a request for temporary spousal support on September 9th, 2016. There was a hearing held on the 17th of February. And then the parties engaged in email exchanges after the court entered an order on February 21st, 2017, ordering Spector to pay spousal support and certain professional fees, with the first support payment being due March 1st, 2017. And I don't know it doesn't specify what that payment amount was. The Spector's attorneys didn't believe the calculations were correct. And so they sent an email to the judge, said, hey, I think you made a mistake. And I thought at the hearing, this wasn't going to be a final order. It was going to be a temporary order because the parties still need to argue. And so they went back and forth. And then Rochelle's attorneys provided the hearing transcript. Arguments were submitted by both parties to the court on March 15th. And then on March 23rd, the court did modify its order, reducing the temporary spousal support payment. Rochelle appealed that in April 2017, and the court affirmed the trial court's revision of the recalculation of support payment and ordered that Spector would recover his costs. Now, yes, he had $300 in prison, but he still had income because he's got this music catalog that is his. And every time somebody plays a song, they pay it. When David Mamet played these songs in his movie, he paid Phil Spector. So, he was not hurting for money. And I think he was estimated like at 50 million. Even in prison. Even with what he spent on attorneys. Then on June 4th, 2018, the opinion was certified for publication by order of the appellate court in the official reports. A decree was entered in December 2018. The divorce was granted. The marriage between Spector and Rochelle was dissolved. However, Rochelle got 50% of the Pyrenees Castle and the memorabilia.
She's a genius.
Owned by Phil Spector. Or actually, no, she got 50% of Pyrenees Castle. Phil got to keep his memorabilia. That's a mistake in my notes.
She's a genius.
And then they were going to have to sell the castle and split the money. So the castle went on the market. It was listed for sale for $5.9 million. In December of 2020, Spector was transferred to San Joaquin General Hospital in French Camp, California, after he was diagnosed with COVID-19. He died on January 16th, 2021, at the age of 81. Dennis Reardon died on August 11th, 2022. Ronnie Spector died in January of 2022. On May 24th, 2021, which is in the wrong place. Sorry, people. Again, the Pyrenees Castle sold for $3.3 million. There's a dispute because apparently after Phil died, Rochelle said, all this memorabilia in this house of mine. Now, Spector had set up a trust for his daughter, Nicole. But apparently the terms after he died, the terms of the divorce and who got what was not clear. And so Rochelle, as we know, possession is 90% of the law. So all that shit was in the house and she had it on the market to be sold. And frankly, I think she put it on the market, but I don't think she was in a big hurry to sell it. I think she was biding her time because he was in his 80s. I mean, he was in his late 70s. So, she was biding her time. And she played the waiting game and she sold the house and she got all the memorabilia. She auctioned it off. Nicole went after the auction company and apparently settled. She got a temporary restraining order, but that was apparently dissolved. So, but yeah, it became a shit show even after he was dead. But yeah, Rochelle made out like a bandit.
Yeah, she was pretty clever.
Because if he didn't have a will, then she probably did get to keep the $3.3 million for the house. Because if he didn't have a will when he died, his half interest in the house probably went to her because she hadn't sold it. So, yeah. So that is the case against Phil Spector. Anybody who believes that Lana Clarkson went into a stranger's house and got a stranger's gun and sat in his foyer with her purse on her shoulder and shot herself in the head is crazy. If she was suicidal, she wouldn't have killed herself in Phil Spector's house. If she was suicidal and tonight was the night she was just going to end it all, she would have declined his offer of drinks. She would have gone home and she would have done it there. Or she would have gone to the nearest bridge or overpass and done it there. You know, I mean, there are a lot of places she could have taken her own life, and Phil Spector's house is not one of the probable locations. Nor could it have been an accident. And of course, you know, Spector's defense was he would have had more blood on him. Well, just because your experts can rig a test that makes it look like he should have had more blood than he did, doesn't mean he couldn't have shot her.
Right.
So, yeah. And anybody who's interested in the whole universe of facts, because there's a lot, I would suggest watching the trial firsthand for yourselves, or reading the appellate opinions, because they are quite illuminating. So, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, it's like the people you haven't. I mean, I know there's other people too that aren't wealthy, but I mean, this guy's gotten away with his whole life abusing women and being just kind of a jerk, and still seem to get away with it for a long time. So it's terrible. What a terrible tragedy. I mean, it's funny. Just think about, I was thinking about her career, and I used to watch a lot of those. I'm sure I saw her a bunch of watch of those crazy kind of B movies she was in when I was a kid and like in high school. And so it's just a shame. What a tragedy.
Yeah.
It, not to get too philosophical, but it's shocking to me that somebody with so much money and so much success, who like has every material thing one could reasonably want, could still be such a miserable son of a gun.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and it was, pardon me, sorry. It was deep-seated abandonment issues, but get help, dude. And this is something that's been happening, but what happened is, when it happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s, he suffered no consequences. He didn't expect consequences this time. Read his statements to the Alhambra Police Department. You know, if you watch the movie where he says things like, you know, she came in my house and she blew her head off and she ruined my life, you know, and I'm being punished and I'm being persecuted. I mean, he called the prosecutor a Nazi when he was indicted. So, you know, he had a persecution complex. He was an asshole. He was an ogre. He was a jerk. He was a drunk. He was an ugly, ugly, mean drunk. And I don't know that he no longer had talent. He had talent maybe in his younger days, but his first song is based on the epitaph on his father's grave. So he could have really benefited, as I said earlier, from psychological and or psychiatric help, because he had freaking baggage.
Yeah.
Way bigger than he was. And he was a little Oompa Loompa guy. You know, a little itty bitty Oompa Loompa guy. That's why he needed a gun.
Yep.
Because he was a little bit, and he threatened men with guns. I mean, he fired off a shot with John Lennon in the studio. He fired off, I think he probably fired off shots with the Wrecking Crew when they weren't doing what he wanted him to do. And, you know, he threatened Leonard Cohen with a gun, and the Ramones. And those were men, but they were bigger than he was. And he probably had a little teeny tiny micro dick too, if you want to go there. because he obviously wasn't able to. He attempted, but he wasn't able to. But he wanted to. And I think he wanted a mother.
Yeah.
So, but he should have gotten psychiatric help instead of being an ogre asshole who terrorized his wife, his wives, his children. I'm amazed that, Rochelle thinks he was a nice guy, although the police took all of his guns, so he couldn't threaten her with those when she was with him. So, all right, well, those are my final thoughts. Again, it is Bastille Day. Happy Bastille Day.
Vive la France.
Vive la Revolution. My horrible French. Thank you for listening to Based in Fact, a true crime podcast with Lisa O'Brien and Kyle Evans. If you like the show and want to know more, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Facebook, or follow me on Twitter at O'BrienLAnn. Kyle and I will return in 2 weeks for episode 11, State of Texas versus Linda Anita Carty. In May 2001, to avoid losing her common-law husband, Carty was the mastermind behind the kidnapping and murder of Joanna Rodriguez, who'd given birth to a son days before. Carty, accompanied by 3 thugs, broke into the apartment Joanna shared with her husband and a cousin. They beat the men and took Joanna and her newborn son out of the apartment. Joanna was put in the trunk of a car and later suffocated with a plastic bag. We'll talk about the evidence against Carty, her trial, direct appeal, and state post-conviction claims, and her federal habeas litigation, including her request to file a petition for relief, which was denied by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal in 2020. Until then, have a safe 2 weeks. Good night.